Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful week. We certainly appreciate you being here tonight for services. Just want to run through the schedule real quick. The 19th, next Thursday, there is a ladies' luncheon scheduled. The 20th, ladies will be taken off for winter retreat, and then the 21st, that Saturday, I'm sure several ladies out of town, there is a men's fellowship event. So mark your schedules for those. And the 27th, the girls' club is meeting again, right? Is that 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock at the building. So 6 o'clock here at the building. Go ahead and mark number 916. 916 will be your song of invitation. Couple new prayer requests and a few updates. Jackie Fleischman, I don't know if she fell or what. Did she fall? She broke her shoulder.
Yeah, she fell and broke her shoulder. She's going to be in this for 4 weeks.
So we hope everything heals back up like it should for Miss Jackie. But please remember her in your prayers. Also, Betty Melcher still in the hospital. Galen Jones as well. Louis Pickhock is also dealing with the broken shoulder. Certainly want to pray for healing for him. The Bailey's got an update today. Of course, Raylan visited the specialist. He's going to start a series of procedures on his eye and some therapy that'll go on. It sounds like once a month until the eye is showing progress. But I think they're encouraged by their visit. We certainly want to try and encourage them and pray for Raylan. They're going to do everything they can to try and save his eyesight. So please remember to pray for Raylan and Jessica and Clint as well. Crystal is probably in the back, right? Oh, sorry to hear about your cousin and losing her child. Her cousin lost a child, which is extremely difficult. And you guys have been through a lot lately, so I know you got a lot on your plate. So we certainly want you to know we love you guys. You know that. And be praying for them. We got a few others that are still mourning loss as well. So just please remember them in your ongoing prayers. Any additional prayer request? Our brother Jesse, we'll remember him. Yes, sir. Okay. So exploratory kind of thing? Okay. And Jessica's mom? Okay. Do you have the app? Your mom does, right? Yeah. Will you guys put that on the app, update that? Okay. Thank you for that. Let's see. Who's doing it? JT, you got prayer tonight.
If you'll pray with me. Dear Father, we come to you tonight that you can pray for all the people that we've mentioned tonight, Father, whether that be that they are sick, Father, or that they're just going through something, Father, you can just help them. Please be with the people who weren't mentioned, Father, but were on people's hearts, that you can be with them and help them with whatever is going on, Father. Please be with us as this weekend the youth group travels to Winterfest, Father, that they have safe travels and a good time there and safe travels back, Father. Please be with this weather, Father, as it is very bipolar. It's warm, then it's cold, and people get sick, and sickness goes around very fast. Thank you, Father, for this week and what it's brought, and for all the many blessings. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Open with me in your Bibles to Leviticus chapter 14, if you're able. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Leviticus. Maybe that's blasphemous for me to say, but it's really hard to drudge through a lot of the Levitical laws when you're just doing your daily reading. But as you connect a lot of the things from the Old Testament to the New Testament, books like Leviticus and Numbers, which Numbers has got a little bit more exciting stuff in it than Leviticus does. Those books, you start to look at them in a different light. And a while back, and I've kind of been doing this in my Sunday night series about Genesis and Revelation too, but that all kind of started from a Bible study procedure that I've been doing for a long time, and I don't do it every day like I should, and I probably don't do it as many days as I think I do. But instead of starting in Genesis and going all the way to Revelation, which I've done that before, but I like to read a chapter out of the New Testament, a chapter out of the Old Testament, and a psalm. So I get a little bit of the New Testament, a little bit of the Old Testament, and then I get some praise or some prayer in there as well. And every now and then you stumble along something, and you could call it the providence of God. You could just call it coincidence, whatever you want to call it. You stumble on something sometimes, and because you've got that New Testament mentality and you're in it, you've just got done reading something, you pop into the Old Testament, and then you see something that's extremely similar, and the thread of proof in the Word of God just continues to be strengthened. Here in Leviticus chapter 14, we read about a very specific process to help cleanse lepers. Leprosy, obviously, a very bad disease, especially during that time. We still have leper colonies today. It's still a bad disease. But then it was really bad because there was no real treatment for it. There's not a whole lot that they could do. But God had provisions for that, and He had ways that people could be cleansed of their leprosy, or they could at least be made clean from it, from the laws of God. That way they could continue to stay with the people. And then obviously we see Jesus cleansing people of leprosy a lot, and there's a lot of symbolism in that as well. We'll go to verse 1 of Leviticus chapter 14. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look. Then, if the case of the leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthen vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood, and the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird who was killed over the fresh water. He shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. He who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes and shave off all of his hair and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp and live outside his tent 7 days. And on the 7th day he shall shave off all the hair of his head, his beard, his eyebrows. He shall shave off all of his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean." So the idea seems pretty straightforward, but it takes a little bit of mental judo to kind of get to it, or to kind of think about what's happening. So at this point, the person who is being cleansed for the population has already been cured of their leprosy. It's either run its course, or it has been found that they are cleansed enough to re-enter the camp. So the process is to take a clay bowl or a jar, vessel, water jar, whatever it may be. You fill that with fresh water, and then you take 2 birds and you slaughter one of the birds. Two doves, you slaughter one of the doves. You allow that dove's water, or that dove's blood, to drip in the water, and then you take a plank of cedar wood, a piece of scarlet yarn or purple yarn, and then you take the live bird and you dip all of those things together in the water. And then you send the live bird away in the field, so that bird continues to live, but has been a symbol of this disease being washed away. And then there's some other things that the person has to do. They have to sit out their tent for 7 days, which is a very powerful number. It was very powerful to the Israelites. It meant a lot of things. There was a completeness there. Washing clothes, shaving of hair, that's kind of getting all of the infections away and giving them a chance to be cleansed so that they didn't pass that disease on to somebody else. But you look at this process and you go, what in the world does this have to do with anything? Right? And that's a lot of, when you read Leviticus, or at least when I read Leviticus, a lot of times I'm telling myself, what does this have to do with anything? Right? What is the point of this process other than to just have God seeing whether or not we're going to follow his instructions? Right? But then you pop over into the New Testament. Anywhere around the end of any of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I recommend John. So Jesus, when he's delivered over to be crucified, the first thing that they do is they weave together a crown of thorns and they place it on his head. And then they take a scarlet robe or a purple robe made out of the same type of yarn that might have been used here in this process. And they put it on Jesus' back after they had beaten him and tortured him, and his back looks like hamburger meat at this point, probably. They put this scarlet robe, purple robe on him, and then later on they're just going to rip it off and open up all those wounds again. We have a cedar wood here that is used to dip in the water with cedar wood used here that's dipped to dip the doves in, and you see Jesus being hung on a wooden cross. We've got hyssop used in this process, and we know that when Jesus was hanging on the cross and that he said that he thirsts, they put sour wine on the end of a hyssop branch and put it on a sponge, put it up to his mouth to try and get him to drink, and he wouldn't drink. The blood being shed, obviously very symbolic, and we see that in Jesus as well. But then we have the water that is being used here. And we don't just have one bird dying, but we have another bird living. We've got two beings, right? Two things. One is dead, one is alive, but they both go into the water. And the blood is there. And when they come up, they're cleansed. And then one bird is allowed to go free, runs into the field, symbolically taking this disease with him, showing the symbolism of this person that is now clean. And we obviously have Jesus, who died on that Friday and was placed in a tomb, but ultimately raised on the third day. But Jesus' resurrection, while the most extremely significant point of all history, he comes and he resurrects and he goes back to heaven and then gives us the command and the process to go under the water the same way that he did, to go into the tomb and to raise up and to be washed in his blood. And we, instead of having to go sit in a tomb for 3 days, or we, instead of having to die for our transgressions, which is what should happen, we get to go. We get to run. We get to go to the field. And we get to be free, symbolically washed and physically washed and spiritually cleansed of all of the things that are holding us back from a full relationship with the Creator of the universe. So I read Leviticus sometimes and I say, what in the world does any of this stuff mean? But then I pop into the New Testament and I see the entirety of the Bible coming to fruition in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the entirety of the Bible always pointing to Jesus as the founder and perfecter of our faith, and also showing us that there is a way for us to be closer to Him than anyone else has been in history. That we've been given this gift of baptism, of a spiritual and appeal to a good conscience for God, so that we can walk in newness of life. We can be the part of this process that gets to run free, freer than we've ever been. And while we have that freedom, we get to be close to a Creator who was willing to be the one that stayed behind, to be the one that was willing to die and shed his blood so that we could have eternal life. So if you need to get closer to him tonight, or you haven't died in baptism, you haven't taken part in this process, we want to help you do that. We want you to be as close to God as possible tonight before you walk out of these doors and go to your homes this evening when we're done. If that means that you need to come and confess something and let us pray for you, we'd love to do that. If that means you need to die in baptism tonight, we'd love to help you do that too. Come tell us what you need as we stand and sing.
Heartache shall come, no more clouds in the sky, no more tears to dim the eye. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. There'll be no sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, no more sickness, no pain, no more parting over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see, when I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. We're dismissed to class.
Thank you for being here tonight. Hope to see you Sunday when dismiss the class.
Okay, if we could calm down over there a little bit. All right, we're going to get started again. I'll pick up where I left off last week. From last week, let's see if this works. Okay, we were talking about how bad it could get for if you were under Roman rule. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Caesar a little bit. I mentioned earlier what he was doing in England, in Britain. But this battle we're going to discuss, this is just one of many battles Rome fought in many parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. But it's one that's held out as particularly, you want to know why Caesar was held up as a brilliant general. This battle really explains it. I can't go into all the details here today, but first thing, Roman control of Gaul. So Gaul, think of it as France, mainly southern, middle France. I don't know that the northern part is what they called Gaul back then. And Caesar invaded. Now the Romans had been invading parts of Gaul already, the southern parts, but Caesar went in and really started taking territory. And as it always seems to happen in Roman-controlled areas, they would control an area, but then there would be an uprising, and various things like that. So similar to Britain, though, there wasn't a unified government or unified people in France. It was a bunch of different warring tribes. Oftentimes they fought each other. But when the Roman invaded, they did sort of put aside their differences and come together. And they had one leader. This guy's name is Vercingetorix. All right. And again, if you even just skimmed around Roman history, you'll run across this battle pretty quick. So what happened? Well, Caesar invades Gaul to stamp down some uprisings that were occurring. The Gauls had rebelled. Vercingetorix had become their leader. He was a pretty good general, all things considered, himself, or whatever his title was. There were several battles the Romans fought with the Gauls, okay, in Caesar. Maneuvering, things of that nature going on. Caesar, and in Rome in general, but Caesar in particular, when they had to come in to put down uprisings, there was no mercy. All right, they showed little quarter unless a town just surrendered completely at the, and even then, a lot of times it wasn't the case. They would just come in, burn the place to the ground, kill everybody. They wouldn't care if they killed everybody, but anybody that was left was going to be captured and taken into slavery. And so Caesar has claimed to have killed 40,000 people in one battle. Now, these figures, you have to be grain of salt with these things. A lot of bragging going on, but by all accounts, it was very, very rough for the people of Gaul when all this was going on. So with the maneuvering, Vercingetorix ends up at this fortified town called Alesia. It's not just fortified; it's up on a hill. It's some rivers on either side. In England, you'd call it a hill fort, probably. It was a walled city, and so they felt very well protected there. Caesar's men surrounded the town and started what is a siege. Basically, the intent was, with any siege back then, was to sit it out. We're gonna park our troops around, and you can't get any food in, and you all will starve before we run out of food on our end, or give up on our end. But this was kind of Vercingetorix's plan. His plan was to have a Roman siege, but there were also they had armies outside the gates, and so the intent was to basically sandwich Caesar between their wall, so his troops on the inside and their other troops on the outside to come together and defeat Caesar in that way. Caesar, smart enough to see through all this, all right? So just rough numbers, they had about 80,000 soldiers inside the gates, another 100,000 outside the gates. These numbers, again, taken with a grain of salt, best historians can sort of come out there. There was no census, there's no records of this stuff, so this is just their best estimations of what they would have had. So they hoped to crush Caesar. So what did Caesar do to prevent this? Well, he built a wall around this entire mountain that this city was on. His soldiers did. This took a month or so to do. I think it was about 10 miles in length. They also knew these other Gaulish forces were out there, so he builds a second wall between him and the outside troops. Wall on the inside, wall on the outside. When I say wall, we're talking miles and miles and miles of wooden palisades, basically ditches that they've dug. Caesar had 60 to 75,000 men. That's a lot of labor, especially when it's trained and they know this is what they do. I showed you the pictures of the forts last week. They dig ditches like crazy, and these are deep ditches. These, what is called a Punic ditch, even though the Punic was Carthage, was a ditch that was designed to be a more gradual slope on the enemy side and then steep on the side of the Romans. So once you're in there, you couldn't climb up and over, and then he could just hammer you with whatever they had. It was almost a suicide pact to go into these ditches. And so the Romans knew what they were doing. And so they dig these ditches. Now, again, the archaeology shows that these ditches weren't fully complete all the way around. They followed the landscape. There was areas where it wasn't, they couldn't really build a wall or, because of the lay of the land, that kind of thing. But a lot of times that was really steep land and fairly protective anyways. But they still built mile after mile after mile of wall and ditch. All right, and there was also towers along this wall made of wood. I mean, these guys chopped down hundreds of thousands of trees probably to make these walls. And so you got an inner wall and an outer wall. So I believe I got a map here. Yeah, so a little hard to see. The red one is the inner wall. The black one is the outer wall. The green spot in the middle is the walled portion of the city. They'd also built a wall themselves inside that area, but now they're trapped. They can't get any food in. A siege otherwise, it's hard to have troops everywhere, so they would have been able to get people in and out, supplies in and out. So with Caesar building this wall, they're completely cut off. The other thing it did from a communication standpoint is now they cannot send runners and scouts out back and forth between the forces in the city and the forces outside the city. So now they're blind to what each other's doing. Their intent was to be able to coordinate to some degree and attack in the same place from inside and out. Now he's taking that away from them. So this is a brilliant move. Caesar, in and of himself, had the faith of his soldiers well enough that they did this. This is, the Roman soldiers are like, what are we going to do? And they had their own supply issues. They had their own food they had to get. So they would march out in force and go raid the landscape, go raid villages and things like that for food and whatnot and bring it back in. But they might send 1,000, 2,000 men at a time to do this sort of thing. So they could fight off any smaller forces that they ran into. They had their own scouts, so they knew where the Gallic forces were, the main forces. So they were able to pull this off. When there was fighting, and it was immense fighting that happened, Caesar could move troops inside this walled area. They could come and go to the areas where they were stressed. And Caesar himself would be right at the front, was in grave danger of being killed in combat of his own. And he was known for that. And he would have been, my age back then. So I'm sure he had achy knees and everything else, so I can't imagine being my age trying to swing combat like that. But there he was. And so he was, this was a brilliant campaign. And it completely cut him off. It got so bad for the Gauls inside the city that they sent out all the civilians, the sick, the women, the children. They kicked them out of the city, thinking Caesar would let them move on through, and they would go into the countryside. And Caesar said nope. And those people were, so they tried to get back into the city, and Vercingetorix wouldn't let them back in because his soldiers would be starving, and those people starved to death out in that area. This is brutal. That world, it's not just a Roman world. People were brutal back then, and their concept of respect of life is nothing like what we have today. But those people were all, most of them would have died out there starving to death because they wouldn't have been sent out with supplies as it was. So this is what I really drive home here, besides Caesar being a brilliant general, was the lengths they will go to stop any kind of people fighting against them, to stop uprisings. They will stop at nothing to finish it. You read about the battles of Carthage. I mentioned this last time around. if they lost a legion, they'd raise another legion. I mean, it may take time. It took years. They fought Hannibal for almost 20 years, So they're in it for the long haul, but they are not afraid to use their absolute might to get what they want. And they ultimately win this battle. He's defeated and he surrenders. As was the custom in Rome, he takes Vercingetorix to Rome. All right, as he's captured, he's alive. But Roman politics, Caesar crosses the Rubicon. They wanted him to stay out. He's very popular. The Roman politics, I don't even pretend to understand it. They were afraid he was going to come back, and the Roman people would want him to be the new emperor. So they ordered him to stay in France, not to come any farther south than the Rubicon River. He comes south anyways, and an Italian civil war, the Roman civil war kicks off. He ends up all over Italy, into Greece, over in Egypt. Before all this is said and done, takes about 5 years, comes back to Rome after all that's done, and then has a victory celebration for Vercingetorix, the Battle of Alesia from 5 years ago. All right, and this is where the Roman stuff gets even cruel again. Vercingetorix is paraded before the people of Rome, and then, as is Roman tradition, he is ritually garroted, which is choked to death with a cord or some sort. They did that in a ritual fashion. This was part of their religion. So what ends up happening in Gaul? I mentioned before that Rome really needs people to farm and to do all these other things to raise money for Rome. Well, the estimates I've seen, about a third of the population was likely died in these battles. Starved to death, probably most of them, because the Romans would come and take the food. When you're at battle, you're not harvesting or planting crops, and famine can follow thereafter, all right? About a third were probably sold into slavery, and roughly a third were left behind under Roman rule after that to pick up the pieces. So yeah, devastated Gaul. There's comments about how there was areas of land completely unfarmed, devoid of people. I mean, they didn't, and I put it into modern terms, they didn't play around. Rome, this is how Rome handled dissension. This is how they handled uprisings. This is how they handled these things. If you didn't come in line quick, they brought the hammer and they brought it hard. And people like Caesar, and they had others that were excellent generals as well, knew exactly how to use a Roman army. All right, so you get the gist of this, though. We can study the specifics of the battle, but you see the tenacity that they would have, and the desire to not put up with any sort of dissension at all. All right, so let's get to Israel. All of that I did last week and this week is to prep you a little bit for what is Rome doing in Israel. So Rome would handle different areas differently based on the people, their view of the people, how the conquered people reacted, what was their previous relationship beforehand, a variety of things. The particular generals involved handled things differently, all right? So they didn't necessarily do in England might have been a little different than what they would do in Israel, all right? But so Jerusalem was captured by the Romans in 63 BC by Roman General Pompey. He was asked to intervene, much like what happens in England, about 100 years later, all right? There were some warring factions within Israel, and fighting over the ascension to a throne. So the Hasmonean dynasty of Judea, and they were brought in as a means to try to settle a dispute as to who would sit on this throne. All right. Well, Rome doesn't just come to mediate a little bit and then leave. If they come, they stay. All right. That's one of the things these people didn't seem to figure out. And so they attack. They take Jerusalem. I don't know all that. I didn't read every last little thing that happened. There's multiple battles and things of that nature. The point is King Herod, isn't king yet. But he's a governor of Galilee, and he's believed to have put down a rebellion, an anti-Roman rebellion in Galilee. And because of that, I'm trying to read my own writing here. So that's somewhere around the mid-40s BC, all right? Various battles and other regional powers resulted, and Herod's brother was killed in one of these battles. And the Parthian invasion captures Judea. So Herod goes to Rome for help. So here they are going back to Rome again. Now, Rome's already there, but Rome is not there in full power the way they showed up in England with multiple legions. They showed up attacked. They were impacted by these battles as well. The thing you have to remember is you're on the outskirts of the Roman realm at this point. And they can't, the heavy lift it takes to get troops that far away when there's other things going on, like in Gaul and other places where there might be uprisings. They only have so many legions, and they move them around quite a bit. The reason why, one of the main primary reasons why the Romans left England was they needed legions to go in another part of Rome to quell rebellion. So they said, England's too far away and too expensive. We'll bring our troops back and put them to work elsewhere. All right, so Herod goes to Rome for help. The Roman Senate, now Herod has friends in Rome. He's not just a Jewish leader. He's good friends with some of the, Mark Antony, for example. He is good friends with him. He's good friends with some other Romans. So Herod's Jewish, almost in name only, all right? He is, but he's not. He's got connections, family connections and otherwise, to other non-Jewish people. I'm trying to make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Well, anyhow, so he goes to Rome. The Roman Senate declares him the king of Judea, the king of the Jews, ironically. And even though he really didn't have an army, they gave him one, basically, or he was able to use the Roman army to effect. So he becomes a client king, a vassal king of Rome. Herod, even though he had fought several battles with other Jewish groups, he always kept good relations with the Romans, all right? And he maintained good relations with Rome. And so Rome even assigned him troops out of Syria, I'll talk about in a minute. So I got a quote here that I thought was interesting. Rather than try to summarize it, I just read the quote. By 37 BCE, Herod had subdued virtually all of the country. By order of Antony, Susius, the Roman governor of Syria, gave Herod aid, which ultimately enabled him to take Jerusalem. So Herod's reinvading Jerusalem, taking it away from these other groups that had attacked. And Antigonus was captured by the Romans and was beheaded at the wish of Herod. Thus, the Hasmonean rule over an independent nation in the land of Israel was finally brought to an end. All right, so what does this mean for Israel? If you're an Israeli, if you're a Jew, what it means is you no longer have independent control, Jewish-led control of Rome or over Judea. Rome is always there now. All right, they had battles. Rome's now solid in. Even if Herod is considered Jewish, he's a vassal of Rome, not independent from any other power. Herod admired the Greco-Roman philosophy, Greco-Roman world, their culture. And he becomes one of the most powerful leaders in Eastern Rome. He rules for 30 years. Jerusalem becomes very wealthy under his kingship. But he was a tyrannical leader, all right? Followed in the way of the Romans, all right? Absolutely. So Rome is now Jerusalem's, he builds the temple. He got a very wealthy part of the world, and he oversees it all. He dies in 4 BCE, but Jewish control doesn't last long at this point. They were already just a vassal state, but what ends up happening here, his brother takes over, but the Romans depose him in 6 BC. I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. All right, so yeah, Rome is deposed in 6 BCE, and these Roman procurators or prefects come in. So think Pontius Pilate, not right, or not at that point, but later. So basically, Roman administrators are now coming in to run Judea. They're not going to be run by a Jewish king, even if it's a vassal king. All right, these are Roman proper coming in to run the place. 10 years after Herod's death, Judea came under direct Roman administration. Growing anger against increased Roman suppression of Jewish life resulted in sporadic violence, which escalated into a full-scale revolt in 66 CE, so 33 years after Jesus' death. Superior Roman forces led by Titus were finally victorious, running razing Jerusalem to the ground in 70 CE and defeating the last Jewish outpost at Masada in 73. So this is more or less the world Jesus lives in, all right? Not the last bit there, but the Jews from about the point of Herod's death were already desiring the Messiah. They were looking for the Messiah. They were looking for a militaristic Messiah, though. They're looking for a king, a general to come in and get them back their rule over their territory, all right? The Romans, as you remember me talking about England, they like to Romanize the area what they control, turn the people into Romans, change their culture. And the Jews, maybe more than most groups in anywhere, were going to be resistant to that. They're very devout, lots of them, and so they fought hard against that. They were harder. They would have been a harder group to Romanize than other places Rome had been. So they're wanting a Messiah to come in and straighten things out for them. So let's talk a little bit about Roman and Jewish relations here. First, how did they get along? Well, outside of Israel, Jews had already been living in the Roman world quite a bit. From various other wars and things like famines and whatnot, a lot of Jews had moved into the Roman world, in Turkey and all the way into Italy. And they were allowed to live and practice their religion. They paid taxes. They became Roman citizens over time. They lived in a good chunk of the Roman Empire. But they had a heavy tax burden to pay, especially in Israel. And these taxes, and Randy asked what percentage it might have been. What I was reading was 50% was the norm, but we'll get into a little bit. It could be easily substantially more than that. Roman rule was the Roman rules were subject to change. I think of Darth Vader quotes. I'm not a big Star Wars guy, but he says, "I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it any further." That's literally how the Romans would operate. They were really good at reneging on deals. If the leadership changed, they would just ignore past deals and do what they wanted to do. Who was going to stop them, right? So, and so they were able to do that. So if you're a Jew and you're trying to make your way in this world, it's hard. The rules are changing. Something to think about too is by the time Jesus came along, the Romans, by the time he's teaching, by the time he's, when he's spreading his word, the Romans have been there for closing in on, 70 or 80 years by that point, several generations. So anybody alive and active would have been born into a world that was already under Roman control. That's all they would have known. So you've got a lot of Jews, they would have heard stories and passed on stories about, life and the Messiah coming, and they would have been wanting this. But a lot of them it would have been hard for them to comprehend a world without the Romans running things too, though, I would say, because that's all they would have known in their life. Jews would have thought that, the Romans would have did think of themselves as superior to everybody else. All right, they viewed everybody else as rabble and backwater. The Jews kind of had the same thing, though. They were God's chosen people, right? So you put those two together, that's a bit of a clashing culture at that point. From the time of Herod to 66 AD to that battle, you have a continuous decline in Jewish control over their own lives, over their culture, over their own religion. At one point, I think it was Nero, wanted to put a statue of himself in the temple. He thought better of it after a while. But that's what he was wanting to do, as he thought of himself as a god. And, just paying taxes was enough for Jews to be mad about it, because they knew they were paying tribute to these godless heathens, basically. And if you think about it, if they're being taxed at 50+%, they are giving more to the Romans than they could sacrifice and give to God. That would have angered them, So they're losing power. They're losing control. This is gradually going on. I say gradually. It's probably not that gradual. It's probably hitting fits and starts. New leader shows up. Bam. Next, they're running rampant again, or there's a uprising somewhere, and they come down hard on everybody. So these things, it could have been rough at times for Jews. Very oppressive regime they were living under. So how did the Roman collect taxes? We talk a lot about taxes in the Bible with Matthew, how that impacted the Jews. So here's how it worked. There would have been, Romans would have formed joint stock companies. This is what it was. This is a direct quote from what I was reading off of here. And they would buy certain Jewish provinces for a period of 5 years. That was their business. This is a business model, okay? So now they go in as Roman agents to collect taxes for Rome. That's what their job is. That's what they're bidding for to do. This is they would bid for this. And they would employ local Jewish men to be their tax collectors. All right. The tax collectors would then tax imports, exports, bridge tolls, road money, town dues, anywhere else they could tax you. The highest bidder would win the territory, and consequently the tax collectors would skim money off the top for themselves. The whole point was to get rich off of this. All they had to do was give Rome what Rome wanted. If they had extra after that, they got to keep it. Well, they made sure they had extra. All right. So that sounds bad enough, but it gets worse. What were their methods? Well, the methods were unethical, to say the least. For one, the tax collectors would harass people wherever they could, and they would tax them on the spot. So if a different tax collector shook you down for money one day, you might get shook down another day. You might be trying to walk and travel across the countryside, get shook down in one place, and later, even minutes later, get shook down again by another tax collector. And so 50% and then some. You know, they were constantly taken from people wherever they could. Even to the point that they would also inflate what they were taxing you for. So if you were being taxed on the worth of a donkey, oh, well, that donkey's worth $10. This thing's a $4 donkey. We're talking, nope, it's $10. You owe me tax for $10. And that's how they would do. They would artificially inflate the prices and declare a tax on that. You'd have to pay that. But if you couldn't pay it, guess what they'd do? They'd give you a loan. You'd get a loan from the taxpayer that you would have to pay back with high interest. So they would overtax you to the point that you couldn't pay it, make you pay a loan, and now you're a debtor to the tax guy that lives in your town. So it's a little understandable why you start to see this. These people aren't just tax collectors anymore. You know, they're thieves. They're a gang. They operate like the mafia would operate. Give me your money, or be ashamed if something happened to your house, or make something happen to you, or whatever. This is very much a mafia type operation going on here, except that the mafia would have been a little more cognizant of not being too hard on people. They wouldn't have been this bad. And so you think about that level of the Rome could just come in and take your stuff. Your people were doing it to you. So it wasn't just that, you watch Chosen and how they react to Matthew it would have been worse than that. I'm not saying Matthew was one of the worst tax collectors or anything like that, but it isn't just that you were robbing these people. You were denying your own Jewish self to do this for the Romans. So you weren't just taking their money, you were taking their freedom, you were taking their Jewishness away from them. And that's how these tax collectors operated. So that's why they make such a deal of it in the Bible, why it's mentioned multiple times in multiple ways. It's because of how you can't overestimate, this. It's money, it's their wealth, but it's more than that. It's their personality, it's their country, it's their people. All that are being diminished by the tax system the way it was set up. And you got the other things. You've got the Jewish rabbis that were in cahoots with the Romans. They didn't do anything to stop this. They just, they actually worked with, worked with the Romans to quell uprisings and people being mad. They might tell the Romans, hey, lay off a little bit, otherwise you have problems here. So they were collaborating with the Romans in a lot of ways. So, and this is how the Romans would operate. They were perfectly happy to operate this. As long as there was peace and there was, they didn't have uprisings and there was money coming in, they were fine with this. They didn't have any qualms about, somebody's life being ruined over a tax debt. And so, we step back and we kind of, I don't want to say we don't scoff at the idea, but you become more understanding of why the Jews wanted general instead of a savior of their souls, right? It becomes more, this is what they were wanting, this is what they were looking for. And they had that in the past. They'd had people, I'll talk here in a bit, but they get generals later on too that ultimately fail, but they weren't looking for a savior who said you got to be kind to Romans as well as your fellow neighbor, So let's talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. I'll start by saying this is not the last Jewish revolt. There were others. There's 1 in 100 something again against the Romans. This is a theme that continues on. But this is a fairly successful revolt, at least at the beginning. They drive the Romans out of Jerusalem. This starts in 66 AD. All right. Titus, the Roman general, brings multiple legions with him, along with what they call auxiliary legions. These are Roman legions made of Italians, auxiliary legions made up of people from other area, Gaul or the Balkans or someplace like that. These were probably not as well trained or equipped. Might have been the troops that went in first, the chattel, and would have been used for those sorts of purposes. But they also had the promise of, if they won, they got gold and booty from whatever they conquered. So this battle, when they besiege Rome in 70, or Jerusalem in 70, it's a multi-week long battle. They do finally breach the walls, get into the city, and they, just like the Bible says, absolutely level the place. And purposefully, they, raise it, burn it, dismantle what's left, and knock it all down. All right. The walls come down, the temple comes down, homes come down. A lot of the homes wouldn't have been stone. They would have burned all that. And it just completely destroys the city. So the Roman historian Josephus, I did a little look, and Josephus was a Jew, born a Jew, was a Jewish general in one of these battles in 66, is captured, ends up turncoat, working for, forgot which general it was, ends up getting his citizenship. This is in just a matter of years. He was born, pretty high born, but he's the only real recordings we have of this. He's considered a historian. Like a lot of people, writings, anytime you have to take all that with a grain of salt. What the Germans say about World War II is going to be different than what we say about World War II. Even today, that's a problem. Japan and us in World War II, that's, you have to be able to see through some of that. But, he's around when all this is happening. He was born a few years after Jesus' death. So he's around when a lot of this is going on. So they destroy the temple, but you get this, you want to humiliate the Jews? When the temple's destroyed, when they have a victory parade a year later, they have the temple menorah, and that's what goes on their parade. They parade that in a victory parade before, the godless Romans, right? If you think about what that meant, if you're a Jew, what that would mean, your menorah from the temple is now what's being paraded in Rome. And that's how complete the defeat was of the Jews. So that's, Jews, and the other thing was, on top of all the other taxes they paid, because of that uprising, Rome passed a tax on all Jews, no matter where they were in the Roman Empire. I forgot what it was now, significant amount to pay for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Every Jew, if you could have been a Jew in Italy, you still had to pay it. So. If you read about what was going on in that part of the world, Herod's a great example of that. He rose to power. The Romans liked him because he was willing to go fight other Jews. So you've got these factions, and there may have been, like what happens in the Islamic world today, where you got Sunni and Shia. They may have been different, and I don't even pretend to understand all the different Jewish groups, but they may have despised each other. This is where the Zealots come out from one of these battles. What we know is yes. Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's chaos is what it is. And it's, you know, they were, yes, when Jerusalem was surrounded by Rome, there were factions of Jews fighting each other and killing each other. They may have been fighting over the last bit of food that was left, who knows? But this is the kind of thing that goes on there. And when that's what's going on, an organization like a Roman army, that's exactly what they can take advantage of, you know. And yeah, they probably had people fighting on their, you know, Jews fighting on their side, helping sack the temple.
Randy, you mentioned rabbis. I don't think it's rabbis that were prolonged all on through.
Yeah.
It's the Sadducees.
Yeah, the Sadducees. Yeah, yeah.
Sadducees really were not legitimate high priests.
No.
But they were there by the Rome.
Blessing. Yeah. Yeah. And
They were all about keeping Rome in power because that kept them in power.
yep. And it's not to say if Rome left one day, they wouldn't have been happy about it per se, but they were able to use the situation to their advantage. You know, it's sort of like in France in World War II. There was plenty of Frenchmen that worked with the Germans, you know, rounding up Jews. That's how they handled it. You know, that's what they did. It's a very, very similar scenario. Fought against each other. So, how much time I got here? We're doing, let me speed up. All right, so Masada. It was a movie I remember watching back in the 80s, 73 AD, the last sort of holdouts from the 66 initial warfare starts. They take this hill, they go to this hilltop. This fort they're in is actually one of Herod's palaces, a vacation home, so to speak. But the Romans arrive, they build a siege ramp. This takes months. They build a wall. This is going to sound familiar. They build a wall all the way around Masada. Masada's up on a big bluff. They build a wall all the way around it, multiple Roman forts around it, and they sit them out. And then when they eventually attack, and this is where there's historians question the account that the Jews all committed, you know, ritual suicide rather than let a Roman. There's some questioning of that. Whatever it means, whatever happens, this could have been Josephus writing it in a way to show that, yeah, the Romans didn't just slaughter everybody, all right? That may have been, you know, who knows? But in the end, they take the place. So I want to read this quick, and I'll show you a few pictures, and we'll be done. According to military strategist Edward Luttwak, the Roman effort in Masada deployed vast resources and engineering ingenuity to eliminate a small pocket of resistance in an isolated desert fortress with no strategic importance. May have been intended as a message to those considering rebellion. The Romans would relentlessly pursue and crush rebels, even at a great cost, to eradicate any trace of resistance. The last thing they wanted was a group of Jews running around saying, we won, we beat them, come follow us. That was the last thing they wanted, right? So a couple of pictures just to show you here. All right, so this is Masada, which you can see. That's part of a palace that's kind of, if you ever Google it, this is the first picture you'll see. Roman forts built around the desert. Looks a little familiar from the pictures I showed you last week, right? Got that square look to it. You can see the outline. This would not have been a permanent fort. These guys would have been living in tents mainly, but you can still see it. That in front of it is a little wall, part of the wall they built. There's another fort, another section of the wall going around the mountain. So here, aerial photo. Let me try to see if this will work. You got no, it ain't gonna work. Okay, you see the ramp. In front, right at the edge of the picture, you see a square. That's a small fort. To the left upper corner, there's another fort, and you can see some of the wall running in front of it. Also in the left upper corner, a little bit farther right, is another fort. And they just rung the place around it, surrounded it, and waited them out. And they did eventually go in, all right? But, you know, they spent months building that ramp. The Jews up there weren't just letting them do it. They were fighting them back. So they were doing that under fire. Again, looks a lot like Alicia from 100 years prior to that. They just, we'll sit you out. We'll build a wall around your mountain and wait you out. You know, it's pretty incredible. History's a brutal thing. You got to, and I often say the truth of history is not for the lighthearted. It was a brutal existence for a lot of people. And the Romans were really good at it. They handled the Jews they crushed them in this revolt. The Jews did revolt again. I want to say it's about 100 years later or 80 years later, something like that. So, but if you're a Jew in Rome, this is the kind of stuff you or a Jew under Roman control, this is what you live with. But this, everybody under Roman control had to deal with this sort of thing from time to time, depending on how you acted to Rome. So Rome never just befriended everybody. They always had enemies from outside and from inside, and they ultimately collapsed in 400, whatever it was, and to Germanic forces of all people. So, all right, well, that's Rome. That's Roman control. I'm done. I've gone over. So you guys have a good evening, and we'll see you on Sunday.